Driven to Win presents Villette by Charlotte Brontë. In chapters 9 and 10, the silence around Lucy grows heavier. She watches the world, unnoticed, yet feeling everything. But in the stillness, something begins to stir, a shift, a spark. A shadow of change. Let's begin. Chapter 9. Isidore? My time was now well and profitably filled up. What with teaching others and studying closely myself, I had hardly a spare moment. It was pleasant. I felt I was getting on, not lying the stagnant prey of mold and rust, but polishing my faculties and weighting them to a keen edge with constant use. Experience of a certain kind lay before me on no narrow scale. Villette is a cosmopolitan city, and in this school were girls of almost every European nation, and likewise of very varied rank in life. Equality is much practiced in Labassecour. Though not republican in form, it is nearly so in substance, and at the desks of Madame Beck's establishment, the young countess and the young bourgeoise sat side by side. Nor could you always by outward indications decide which was noble and which plebeian, except that, indeed, the latter had often franker and more courteous manners, while the former bore away the bell for a delicately balanced combination of insolence and deceit. In the former, there was often quick French blood mixed with the marsh phlegm. I regret to say that the effect of this vivacious fluid chiefly appeared in the oilier glibness with which flattery and fiction ran from the tongue, and in a manner lighter and livelier, but quite heartless and insincere. To do all parties justice, the honest aboriginal Labassecourians had an hypocrisy of their own too, but it was of a coarse order, such as could deceive few. Whenever a lie was necessary for their occasions, they brought it out with a careless ease and breath altogether untroubled by the rebuke of conscience. Not a soul in Madame Beck's house, from the scullion to the directress herself, but was above being ashamed of a lie. They thought nothing of it. To invent might not be precisely a virtue, but it was the most venial of faults. J. Minty Plessier's voice formed an item of every girl's and woman's monthly confession. The priest heard unshocked and absolved unreluctant. If they had missed going to Mass or read a chapter of a novel, that was another thing. These were crimes whereof rebuke and penance were the unfailing weed. While yet but half conscious of this state of things, and unlearned in its results, I got on in my new sphere very well. After the first few difficult lessons, given amidst peril and on the edge of a moral volcano that rumbled under my feet and sent sparks and hot fumes into my eyes, the eruptive spirit seemed to subside as far as I was concerned. My mind was a good deal bent on cess. I could not bear the thought of being baffled by mere undisciplined disaffection and wanton indocility in this first attempt to get on in life. Many hours of the night I used to lie awake, thinking what plan I had best adopt to get a reliable hold on these mutineers, to bring this stiff-necked tribe under permanent influence. In the first place, I saw plainly that aid in no shape was to be expected from Madame. Her righteous plan was to maintain an unbroken popularity with the pupils, at any and every cost of justice or comfort to the teachers. For a teacher to seek, her alliance in any crisis of insubordination was equivalent to securing her own expulsion. In intercourse with her pupils, Madame only took to herself what was pleasant, amiable, and recommendatory, rigidly requiring of her lieutenant sufficiency for every annoying crisis. Where to act with adequate promptitude was to be unpopular. Thus I must look only to myself, and premise it was clear as the day that this swinish multitude were not to be driven by force. They were to be humored, borne with very patiently. A courteous though sedate manner impressed them. A very rare flash of raillery did good. Severe or continuous mental application they could not, or would not bear. Heavy demand on the memory, the reason, the attention, they rejected point blank. where an English girl of not more than average capacity and docility would quietly take a theme and bind herself to the task of comprehension and mastery, a Labasicorian would laugh in your face and throw it back to you with the phrase, De Cusas difficile, je ne veux pas, fella manui tro. A teacher who understood her business would take it back at once. Without hesitation, contest, or expostulation, proceed with even exaggerated care to smooth every difficulty. To reduce it to the level of their understandings, return it to them thus modified, and lay on the lash of sarcasm with unsparing hand. They would feel the sting, perhaps wince a little under it, but they bore no malice against this sort of attack, provided the sneer was not sour but hearty, and that it held well up to them, in a clear, light, and bold type, so that she who ran might read their incapacity, ignorance, and sloth. They would write for 3 additional lines to a lesson, but I never knew them rebel against a wound given to their self-respect. The little they had of that quality was trained to be crushed, and it rather liked the pressure of a firm heel than otherwise. By degrees, as I acquired fluency and freedom in their language, and could make such application of its more nervous idioms as suited their case, the elder and more intelligent girls began rather to like me in their way. I noticed that whenever a pupil had been roused to feel in her soul the stirring of worthy emulation, or the quickening of honest shame from that date she was won. If I could but once make their usually large ears burn under their thick glossy hair, all was comparatively well. By and by bouquets began to be laid on my desk in the morning. By way of acknowledgment for this little foreign attention, I used sometimes to walk with a select few during recreation. In the course of conversation, it befell once or twice that I made an unpremeditated attempt to rectify some of their singularly distorted notions of principle. Especially I expressed my ideas of the evil and baseness of a lie. In an unguarded moment, I chanced to say that, of the 2 errors, I considered falsehood worse than an occasional lapse in church attendance. The poor girls were tutored to report, in Catholic ears, whatever the Protestant teacher said. An edifying consequence ensued. Something, an unseen, an indefinite, a nameless something stole between myself and these my best pupils. The bouquets continued to be offered, but conversation thenceforth became impracticable. As I paced the alleys or sat in the berceau, a girl never came to my right hand, but a teacher, as if by magic, appeared at my left. Also, wonderful to relate, Madame's shoes of silence brought her continually to my back, as quick as noiseless, and unexpected as some wandering zephyr doth the opinion of my Catholic acquaintance concerning my spiritual prospects was somewhat naively expressed to me on one occasion. A pensionaire, to whom I had rendered some little service, exclaimed one day as she sat beside me, "Mademoiselle, what a pity you are a Protestant. Why, Isabel? Parsic convusor as mort, et vous brûlez tout de suite dans l'enfer. Croyez-vous? Certainement que j'y crois. Tout le monde le sait, et d'ailleurs le prater me le dit." Isabel was an odd, blunt little creature. She added, sotto voce, "Pour assure votre salut la hot, on ferait bien de vous. Broler tout vive, I say bus." I laughed, as, indeed, it was impossible to do otherwise. Has the reader forgotten Miss Ginevra Fanshawe? If so, I must be allowed to reintroduce that young lady as a thriving pupil of Madame Beck's, for such she was. On her arrival in the Rue Fossette, 2 or 3 days after my sudden settlement there, she encountered me with very little surprise. She must have had good blood in her veins, for never was any duchess more perfectly, radically, unaffectedly nonchalant than she. A weak, transient amaze was all she knew of the sensation of wonder. Most of her other faculties seemed to be in the same flimsy condition. Her liking and disliking, her love and hate, were mere cobweb and gossamer. But she had one thing about her that seemed strong and durable enough, and that was her selfishness. She was not proud. Envon d'enfance as I was, she would forthwith have made of me a sort of friend and confidant. She teased me with 1,000 vapid complaints about school quarrels and household economy. The cookery was not to her taste. The people about her, teachers and pupils, she held to be despicable because they were foreigners. I bore with her abuse of the Friday's salt fish and hard eggs, with her invective against the soup, the bread, the coffee, with some patience for a time. But at last, wearied by iteration, I turned crusty and put her to rights, a thing I ought to have done in the very beginning, for a salutary setting down always agreed with her. Much longer had I to endure her demands on me in the way of work. Her wardrobe, so far as concerned articles of external wear, was well and elegantly supplied. But there were other habiliments not so carefully provided. What she had needed frequent repair. She hated needle drudgery herself, and she would bring her hose and see to me in heaps to be mended. A compliance of some weeks threatening to result in the establishment of an intolerable bore, I at last distinctly told her she must make up her mind to mend her own garments. She cried on receiving this information and accused me of having ceased to be her friend. But I held by my decision and let the hysterics pass as they could, notwithstanding these foibles, and various others needless to mention, but by no means of a refined or elevating character. How pretty she was! How charming she looked when she came down on a sunny Sunday morning, well-dressed and well-humored, robed in pale lilac silk, and with her fair long curls reposing on her white shoulders. Sunday was a holiday which she always passed with friends resident in town, and amongst these friends she speedily gave me to understand was one who would fain become something more. By glimpses and hints it was shown me, and by the general buoyancy of her look and manner it was ere long proved that ardent admiration, perhaps genuine love, was at her command. She called her suitor Isidore. This, however, she intimated was not his real name, but one by which it pleased her to baptize him, his own, she hinted, not being very pretty. Once, when she had been bragging about the vehemence of Isidore's attachment, I asked if she loved him in return. "Comtella," said she, "he is handsome, and he loves me to distraction, so that I am well amused." Cassafet, finding that she carried the thing on longer than, from her very fickle tastes, I had anticipated, I one day took it upon me to make serious inquiries as to whether the gentleman was such as her parents, and especially her uncle on whom, it appeared, she was dependent, would be likely to approve. She allowed that this was very doubtful, as she did not believe Isidore had much money. "Do you encourage him?" I asked. "Furious when sometimes," said she, without being certain that you will be permitted to marry him. "Oh, how doubtyish you are. I don't want to be married. I am too young." "But if he loves you as much as you say, and yet it comes to nothing in the end, he will be made miserable. Of course he will break his heart. I should be shocked and disappointed if he didn't." "I wonder whether this Isidore is a fool," said one. "He is about me, but he is wise in other things, assez candide. Mrs. Chumley considers him extremely clever. She says he will push his way by his talents. All I know is that he does little more than sigh in my presence, and that I can wind him round my little finger." Wishing to get a more definite idea of this love-stricken M. Isidore, whose position seemed to me of the least secure, I requested her to favor me with a personal description. But she could not describe. She had neither words, nor the power of putting them together so as to make graphic phrases. She even seemed not properly to have noticed him. Nothing of his looks, of the changes in his countenance, had touched her heart or dwelt in her memory. That he was beau, mais peut-être bel homme que joli garçon, was all she could assert. My patience would often have failed, and my interest flagged in listening to her, but for one thing. All the hints she dropped, all the details she gave, went unconsciously to prove, to my thinking, that Isidore's homage was offered with great delicacy and respect. I informed her very plainly that I believed him much too good for her, and intimated with equal plainness my impression that she was but a vain coquette. She laughed, shook her curls from her eyes, and danced away as if I had paid her a compliment. Miss Ginevra's school studies were little better than nominal. There were but 3 things she practiced in earnest, viz., music, singing, and dancing, also embroidering the fine cambric handkerchiefs which she could not afford to buy ready. Worked. Such mere trifles as lessons in history, geography, grammar, and arithmetic she left undone, or got others to do for her. Very much of her time was spent in visiting. Madame, aware that her stay at school was now limited to a certain period, which would not be extended whether she made progress or not, allowed her great license in this particular. Mrs. Cholmondeley, her chaperone, a gay, fashionable lady, invited her whenever she had company at her own house, and sometimes took her to evening parties at the houses of her acquaintance. Ginevra perfectly approved this mode of procedure. It had but one inconvenience. She was obliged to be well dressed, and she had not money to buy a variety of dresses. All her thoughts turned on this difficulty. Her whole soul was occupied with expedients for effecting its solution. It was wonderful to witness the activity of her otherwise indolent mind on this point, and to see the much daring intrepidity to which she was spurred by a sense of necessity and the wish to shine. She begged boldly of Mrs. Cholmondeley boldly, I say, not with an air of reluctant shame, but in the strain, my darling Mrs. C., I have nothing in the world fit to wear for your party next week. You must give me a book muslin dress, and then a santour blue celeste. Do there's an angel, will you? The darling Mrs. C. yielded at first, but finding that applications increased as they were complied with, she was soon obliged, like all Miss Fanshawe's friends, to oppose resistance to encroachment. After a while, I heard no more of Mrs. Cholmondeley's presence, but still, visiting went on, and the absolutely necessary dresses continued to be supplied, also many little expensive, etc. gloves, bouquets, even trinkets. These things, contrary to her custom, and even nature, for she was not secretive, were most sedulously kept out of sight for a time. But one evening, when she was going to a large party for which particular care and elegance of costume were demanded, she could not resist coming to my chamber to show herself in all her splendor. Beautiful she looked, so young, so fresh, and with a delicacy of skin and flexibility of shape altogether English, and not found in the list of continental female charms. Her dress was new, costly, and perfect. I saw at a glance that it lacked none of those finishing details which cost so much and give to the general effect such an air of tasteful completeness. I viewed her from top to toe. She turned airily round that I might survey her on all sides. Conscious of her charms, she was in her best humor. Her rather small blue eyes sparkled gleefully. She was going to bestow on me a kiss, in her schoolgirl fashion of showing her delights, but I said, "Steady. Let us be steady and know what we are about, and find out the meaning of our magnificence," and so put her off at arm's length to undergo cooler inspection. "Shall I do?" was her question. "Do?" Said there are different ways of doing, and by my word, I don't understand yours, but how do I look? You look well dressed. She thought the praise not warm enough, and proceeded to direct attention to the various decorative points of her attire. "Look at this parure," said she. "The brooch, the earrings, the bracelets. No one in the school has such a set knot. Madame herself, I see them all." Pause. "Did Mime de Saint-Pierre give you those jewels?" "My uncle knows nothing about them." "Were they presents from Mrs. Cholmondeley?" "Not they, indeed." Mrs. Chumley is a mean, stingy creature. She never gives me anything now. I did not choose to ask any further questions, but turned abruptly away. Now, old crusty old Diogenes, these were her familiar terms for me when we disagreed. What is the matter now? Take yourself away. I have no pleasure in looking at you or your parure. For an instant, she seemed taken by surprise. What now, Mother Wisdom? I have not got into debt for it, that is, not for the jewels, nor the gloves, nor the bouquet. My dress is certainly not paid for, but Uncle de Bassompierre will pay it in the bill. He never notices items, but just looks at the total. And he is so rich, one need not care about a few guineas more or less. Will you go? I want to shut the door. Ginevra, people may tell you you are very handsome in that ball attire, but in my eyes you will never look so pretty as you did in the gingham gown and plain straw bonnet you wore when I first saw you. Other people have not your puritanical tastes, was her angry reply. And besides, I see no right you have to sermonize me. Certainly. I have little right, and you, perhaps, have still less to come flourishing and fluttering into my chamber, a mere jay in borrowed plumes. I have not the least respect for your feathers, Miss Fanshawe, and especially the peacock's eyes you call a parure. Very pretty things, if you had bought them with money which was your own, and which you could well spare, but not at all pretty under present circumstances. Honest law per Mademoiselle Fanshawe was announced by the portress, and away she tripped. The semi-mystery of the parure was not solved till 2 or 3 days afterwards. When she came to make a voluntary confession, "You need not be sulky with me," she began, and the idea that I am running somebody, Papa or M. de Bassompierre, deeply into debt. I assure you nothing remains unpaid for, but the few dresses I have lately had. All the rest is settled. There, I thought, lies the mystery. Considering that they were not given you by Mrs. Chumley, and that your own means are limited to a few shillings, of which I know you to be excessively careful. Écoutez, she went on, drawing near and speaking in her most confidential and coaxing tone. For my sulkiness was inconvenient to her. She liked me to be in a talking and listening mood, even if I only talked to chide and listened to. Rail, écoutez, cher Gradneuse. I will tell you all how and about it, and you will then see not only how right the whole thing is, but how cleverly managed. In the first place, I must go out. Papa himself said that he wished me to see something of the world. He particularly remarked to Mrs. Chumley that, though I was a sweet creature enough, I had rather a bread-and-butter eating schoolgirl air, of which it was his special desire that I should get rid by an introduction to society here before I make my regular debut in England. Well then, if I go out, I must dress. Mrs. Chumley is turned shabby and will give nothing more. It would be too hard upon Uncle to make him pay for all the things I need that you can't deny that agrees with your own preachments. Well, but somebody hurt me quite by chance, I assure you, complaining to Mrs. Chumley of my distressed circumstances, and what straits I was put to for an ornament or to somebody, far from grudging one a present, was quite delighted at the idea of being permitted to offer some trifle. You should have seen what a blank-back he looked when he first spoke of it, how he hesitated and blushed, and positively trembled from fear of a repulse. That will do, Miss Fanshawe. I suppose I am to understand that Isidore is the benefactor, that it is from him you have accepted that costly parure, that he supplies your bouquets and your gloves. You express yourself so disagreeably, said she. One hardly knows how to answer. What I mean to say is that I occasionally allow Isidore the pleasure and honor of expressing his homage by the offer of a trifle. It comes to the same thing. Now, Ginevra, to speak the plain truth, I don't very well understand these matters, but I believe you are doing very wrong, seriously wrong. Perhaps, however, you now feel certain that you will be able to marry Isidore. Your parents and uncle have given their consent, and for your part, you love him entirely. Mais, pas du tout. She always had recourse to French when about to say something specially heartless and perverse. Je suis assurée, mais il n'est pas mon héros. Excuse me, I must believe this language is mere nonsense and coquetry. There is nothing great about you, yet you are above profiting by the good nature and purse of a man to whom you feel absolute indifference. You love Isidore far more than you think, or will avow. No, I danced with a young officer the other night, whom I love 1,000 times more than he. I often wonder why I feel so very cold to Isidore, for everybody says he is handsome, and other ladies admire him. But somehow he bores me. Let me see now how it is. And she seemed to make an effort to reflect. In this I encouraged her. Yes, I said, try to get a clear idea of the state of your mind. To me it seems in a great mess chaotic as a ragbag. It is something in this fashion, she cried out alone. The man is too romantic and devoted, and he expects something more of me than I find it convenient to be. He thinks I am perfect, furnished with all sorts of sterling qualities and solid virtues, such as I never had, nor intend to have. Now, one can't help, in his presence, rather trying to justify his good opinion, and it does so tire one to be giddy and to talk sense, for he really thinks I am sensible. I am far more at my ease with you, old lady, you dear crosspatch, who take me at my lowest, and know me to be coquettish, and ignorant, and flirting, and fickle, and silly, and selfish, and all the other sweet things you and I have agreed to be a part of my character. This is all very well, I said, making a strenuous effort to preserve that gravity and severity which ran risk of being shaken by this whimsical candor, but it does not alter that wretched business of the presents. Pack them up, Ginevra, like a good, honest girl, and send them back. Indeed, I won't, said she, stoutly. Then you are deceiving Isidore. It stands to reason that by accepting his presents you give him to understand he will one day receive an equivalent in your regard. But he won't, she interrupted. He has his equivalent now, in the pleasure of seeing me wear them, quite enough for him. He is only bourgeois. This phrase, in its senseless arrogance, quite cured me of the temporary weakness which had made me relax my tone. An aspect, she rattled on, my present business is to enjoy youth, and not to think of fettering myself by promise or vow to this man or that. When first I saw Isidore, I believed he would help me to enjoy it. I believed he would be content with my being a pretty girl, and that we should meet and part and flutter about like two butterflies and be happy. Lo and behold, I find him at times as grave as a judge, and deep-feeling and thoughtful. Bah! Les penseurs, les hommes profonds et passions n'y sont pas mon goût. Le Colonel Alfred de Hamal suits me far better. Vive pour les beaux fats et les jolies ribbons. Vive les joies et les plaisirs. Abaisse les grandes passions et les sévères. Virtus, she looked for an answer to this tirade. I gave none. J'aime mon beau Colonel, she went on. Je n'aimerai jamais son rival. Je n'y serai jamais femme de bourgeois, ma. I now signified that it was imperatively necessary. My apartment should be relieved of the honor of her presence. She went away laughing. Chapter 10. Dr. John. Madame Beck was a most consistent character, forbearing with all the world, and tender to no part of it. Her own children drew her into no deviation from the even tenor of her stoic calm. She was solicitous about her family, vigilant for their interests and physical well-being, but she never seemed to know the wish to take her little children upon her lap, to press their rosy lips with her own, to gather them in a genial embrace, to shower on them softly the benignant caress, the loving word. I have watched her sometimes sitting in the garden, viewing the little bees afar off, as they walked in a distant alley with Trinette, their bonne, and her mien spoke care and prudence. I know she often pondered anxiously what she called leur avenir, but if the youngest, a puny and delicate but engaging child, chancing to spy her, broke from its nurse, and toddling down the walk, came, all eager and laughing and panting to clasp her knee, Madame would just calmly put out one hand, so as to prevent inconvenient concussion from the child's sudden onset, par garde mon enfant. She would say, unmoved, patiently permit it to stand near her a few moments, and then, without smile or kiss or endearing syllable, rise and lead it back to Trinette. Her demeanor to the eldest girl was equally characteristic in another way. This was a vicious child. Quelle peste que cette Désirée. Quelle poison que cet enfant là, were the expressions dedicated to her, alike in kitchen and in schoolroom. Amongst her other endowments, she boasted an exquisite skill in the art of provocation, sometimes driving her bonne and the servants almost wild. She would steal to their attics, open their drawers and boxes, wantonly tear their best caps and soil their best shawls. She would watch her opportunity to get at the buffet of the salle à manger, where she would smash articles of porcelain or glass, or to the cupboard of the storeroom, where she would plunder the preserves, drink the sweet wine, break jars and bottles, and so contrive as to throw the onus of suspicion on the cook and the kitchen maid. All this when Madame saw, and of which, when she received report, her sole observation, uttered with matchless serenity, was Désirée a besoin d'une surveillance toute particulière. Accordingly, she kept this promising olive branch a good deal at her side. Never once, I believe, did she tell her faithfully of her faults, explain the evil of such habits, and show the results which must thence ensue. Surveillance must work. The whole cure. It failed, of course. Désirée was kept in some measure from the servants, but she teased and pillaged her mamma instead. Whatever belonging to Madame's work table or toilet she could lay her hands on, she stole and hid. Madame saw all this, but she still pretended not to see. She had not rectitude of soul to confront the child with her vices. When an article disappeared whose value rendered restitution necessary, she would profess to think that Désirée had taken it away in play and beg her to restore it. Désirée was not to be so cheated. She had learned to bring falsehood to the aid of theft, and would deny having touched the brooch, ring, or scissors. Carrying on the hollow system, the mother would calmly assume an air of belief, and afterwards ceaselessly watch and dog the child till she tracked her to her hiding places, some hole in the garden wall, some chink or cranny in garret or outhouse. This done, Madame would send Désirée out for a walk with her bonne, and profit by her absence to rob the robber. Désirée proved herself the true daughter of her astute parent by never suffering either her countenance or manner to betray the least sign of mortification on discovering the loss. The second child, Fifine, was said to be like its dead father. Certainly, though the mother had given it her healthy frame, her blue eye and ruddy cheek, not from her was derived its moral being. It was an honest, gleeful little soul, a passionate, warm-tempered, bustling creature it was too, and of the sort likely to blunder often into perils and difficulties. One day it bethought itself to fall from top to bottom of a steep flight of stone steps. And when Madame, hearing the noise, she always heard every noise, issued from the salle à manger and picked it up, she said quietly, "Cet enfant est un os de casse." At first we hoped this was not the case. It was, however, but too true. One little plump arm hung powerless. "Let me, meaning me, take her," said Madame. "Et qu'on aille to de suite chercher un fiacre." In a fiacre she promptly, but with admirable coolness and self-possession, departed to fetch a surgeon. It appeared she did not find the family surgeon at home. But that mattered not. She, sought until she laid her hand on a substitute to her mind and brought him back with her. Meantime, I had cut the child's sleeve from its arm, undressed, and put it to bed. We none of us. I suppose by we, I mean the bonne, the cook, the portress, and myself, all which personages were now gathered in the small and heated chamber, looked very scrutinizingly at the new doctor when he came into the room. I, at least, was taken up with endeavoring to soothe Fifine, whose cries, for she had good lungs, were appalling to hear. These cries redoubled in intensity as the stranger approached her bed. When he took her up, let alone. She cried passionately in her broken English, for she spoke English as did the other children. I will not you, I will Dr. Pillule. And Dr. Pillule is my very good friend, was the answer in perfect English. But he is busy at a place 3 leagues off, and I am come in his stead. So now, when we get a little calmer, we must commence business, and we will soon have that unlucky little arm bandaged and in right order. Hereupon he called for a glass of eau sucrée, fed her with some teaspoonfuls of the sweet liquid. Fifine was a frank gourmand. Anybody could win her heart through her palate, promised her more when the operation should be over, and promptly went to work. Some assistance being needed, he demanded it of the cook, a robust, strong-armed woman. But she, the portress, and the nurse instantly fled. I did not like to touch that small, tortured limb, but thinking there was no alternative, my hand was already extended to do what was requisite. I was anticipated. Madame Beck had put out her own hand. Hers was steady, while mine trembled. "Que vaudra mieux?" said the doctor, turning from me to her. He showed wisdom in his choice. Mine would have been feigned stoicism, forced fortitude. Hers was neither forced nor feigned. Merci, madame. "'Ters bien, fort bien," said the operator when he had finished. "Voilà un sang-froid bien opportune, equivat mil allons de sensibilité placée." He was pleased with her firmness, she with his compliment. It was likely, too, that his whole general appearance, his voice, mien, and manner wrought impressions in his favor. Indeed, when you looked well at him, and when a lamp was brought in, for it was evening and now waxing dusk, you saw that, unless Madame Beck had been less than woman, it could not well be otherwise. This young doctor, he was young, had no common aspect. His stature looked imposingly tall in that little chamber and amidst that group of Dutch-made women. His profile was clear, fine, and expressive. Perhaps his eye glanced from face to face rather too vividly, too quickly, and too often, but it had a most pleasant character, and so had his mouth. His chin was full, cleft, Grecian, and perfect. As to his smile, one could not in a hurry make up one's mind as to the descriptive epithet it merited. There was something in it that pleased, but something, too, that brought surging up into the mind all one's foibles and weak points, all that could lay one open to a laugh. Yet Fifine liked this doubtful smile, and thought the owner genial. Much as he had hurt her, she held out her hand to bid him a friendly good night. He patted the little hand kindly, and then he and Madame went downstairs together. She talking, in her highest tide of spirits and volubility, he listening with an air of good-natured amenity, dashed with that unconscious roguish archness I find it difficult to describe. I noticed that though he spoke French well, he spoke English better. He had, too, an English complexion, eyes, and form. I noticed more. As he passed me in leaving the room, turning his face in my direction one moment, not to address me, but to speak to Madame, yet so standing that I almost necessarily looked up at him, a recollection which had been struggling to form in my memory, since the first moment I heard his voice, started up perfected. This was the very gentleman to whom I had spoken at the bureau, who had helped me in the matter of the trunk, who had been my guide through the dark, wet park. Listening as he passed down the long vestibule out into the street, I recognized his very tread, It was the same firm and equal stride. I have followed under the dripping trees. It was to be concluded that this young surgeon-physician's first visit to the Rue Fossette would be the last. The respectable Dr. Pilliel being expected home the next day, there appeared no reason why his temporary substitute should again represent him. But the fates had written their decree to the contrary. Dr. Pilliel had been summoned to see a rich old hypochondriac at the antique university town of Buquin-Moisy, and upon his prescribing change of air and travel as remedies, he was retained to accompany the timid patient on a tour of some weeks. It but remained, therefore, for the new doctor to continue his attendance at the Rue Fossette. I often saw him when he came, for Madame would not trust the little invalid to Trinette, but required me to spend much of my time in the nursery. I think he was skillful. Fifine recovered rapidly under his care, yet even her convalescence did not hasten his dismissal. Destiny and Madame Beck seemed in league, and both had ruled that he should make deliberate acquaintance with the vestibule. The private staircase and upper chambers of the Rue Fosse no sooner did Fifine emerge from his hands than Desiree declared herself ill. That possessed child had a genius for simulation, and captivated by the attentions and indulgences of a sick room, she came to the conclusion that an illness would perfectly accommodate her tastes, and took her bed accordingly. She acted well, and her mother still better, for while the whole case was transparent to Madame Beck as the day, she treated it with an astonishingly well-assured air of gravity and good faith. What surprised me was that Dr. John, so the young Englishman, had taught Fifine to call him, and we all took from her the habit of addressing him by this name, till it became an established custom, and he was known by no other in the Rue Fossette, that Dr. John consented tacitly to adopt Madame's tactics and to fall in with her manœuvres. He betrayed, indeed, a period of comic doubt, cast one or two rapid glances from the child to the mother, indulged in an interval of self-consultation, but finally resigned himself with a good grace to play his part in the farce. Desiree ate like a raven, gamboled day and night in her bed, pitched tents with the sheets and blankets, lounged like a Turk amidst pillows and bolsters, diverted herself with throwing her shoes at her bonne and grimacing at her sister's overflowed in short, with unmerited health and evil spirits, only languishing when her mamma and the physician paid their diurnal visit. Madame Beck, I knew, was glad at any price to have her daughter in bed out of the way of mischief, but I wondered that Dr. John did not tire of the business every day. On this mere pretext of a motive, he gave punctual attendance. Madame always received him with the same empressement, the same sunshine for himself, the same admirably counterfeited air of concern for her child. Dr. John wrote harmless prescriptions for the patient and viewed her mother with a shrewdly sparkling eye. Madame caught his rallying looks without resenting them. She had too much good sense for that. Supple as the young doctor seemed, one could not despise him. This pliant part was evidently not adopted in the design to curry favor with his employer. While he liked his office at the pensionnat and lingered strangely about the Rue Fossette, he was independent, almost careless in his carriage there. And yet, too, he was often thoughtful and preoccupied. It was not perhaps my business to observe the mystery of his bearing or search out its origin or aim. But placed as I was, I could hardly help it. He laid himself open to my observation, according to my presence in the room, just that degree of notice and consequence a person of my exterior habitually expects. That is to say, about what is given to unobtrusive articles of furniture, chairs, of ordinary joiner's work, and carpets of no striking pattern. Often, while waiting for Madame, he would muse, smile, watch, or listen like a man who thinks himself alone. I meantime was free to puzzle over his countenance and movements, and wonder what could be the meaning of that peculiar interest and attachment all mixed up with doubt and strangeness, and inexplicably ruled by some presiding spell which wedded him to this demi-convent secluded in the built-up core of a capital. He, I believe, never remembered that I had eyes in my head, much less a brain behind them. Nor would he ever have found this out but that one day, while he sat in the sunshine and I was observing the coloring of his hair, whiskers, and complexion, the whole being of such a tone as a strong light brings out with somewhat perilous force. Indeed, I recollect I was driven to compare his beamy head in my thoughts to that of the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. An idea new, sudden, and startling riveted my attention with an overmastering strength and power of attraction. I know not to this day how I looked at him. The force of surprise and also of conviction made me forget myself, and I only recovered wonted consciousness when I saw that his notice was arrested and that it had caught my movement in a clear little oval mirror fixed in the side of the window, recessed by the aid of which reflector Madame often secretly spied persons walking in the garden below. Though of so gay and sanguine a temperament, he was not without a certain nervous sensitiveness which made him ill at ease under a direct, inquiring gaze. On surprising me thus, he turned and said, in a tone which, though courteous, had just so much dryness in it as to mark a shade of annoyance, as well as to give to what was said the character of rebuke, "Mademoiselle does not spare me. I am not vain enough to fancy that it is my merits which attract her attention. It must then be some defect. Dare I ask what?" I was confounded, as the reader may suppose, yet not with an irrecoverable confusion, being conscious that it was from no emotion of incautious admiration, nor yet in a spirit of unjustifiable inquisitiveness that I had incurred this reproof. I might have cleared myself on the spot, but would not. I did not speak. I was not in the habit of speaking to him, suffering him, then, to think what he chose and accuse me of what he would. I resumed some work I had dropped, and kept my head bent over it during the remainder of his stay. There is a perverse mood of the mind which is rather soothed than irritated by misconstruction, and in quarters where we can never be rightly known, we take pleasure, I think, in being consummately ignored. What honest man, on being casually taken for a housebreaker, does not feel rather tickled than vexed at the mistake? That's the end of chapters 9 and 10. The story continues tomorrow. Thank you for listening, only on Driven to Win.